People often think that working in the homicide department means running around with your gun out chasing bad guys and serial killers like something from the movies. A lot of the time, though, murder investigations don't start with creepy notes from cannibal geniuses or explosive sprays of bullets. Most times they start like this one did, with reports of a bad smell. Still, with murders as with people, it's often the case that it's the quiet ones you have to look out for. We were called to 18 Merson Road because of the stench. Neighbours had been complaining about the smell for weeks, but it had finally reached the point where the phrase, "it smells like something died in there," was taken seriously. When my partner and I arrived there late one Friday evening, we were struck by the smell even before we approached. From the outside, the apartment looked normal enough. A red wooden door with a porch light above a gold door number attached to the frame, and a small window to the left. Everything but the smell seemed normal until I tried to knock and my hand went through the door. Rather than a real door, the red wooden entrance facing the street was instead a subterfuge, a stage prop door, made to look like wood but actually constructed of plasterboard and canvas. Like a set used in the theatre, what we thought was a real door was actually painted with a brilliant illusion onto a mix of board and fabric. Pulling the board aside, and stunned that we and all of the neighbours could have been tricked by this conceit, I tore at the panelling, only to reveal a full wooden door behind, one that had been nailed shut from the outside. It took 2 men and an axe to get through that door. Inside the apartment, 3 things were obvious immediately. Firstly, the entire place had been soundproofed. The egg box-shaped panelling on the walls and thick sound booth protections made that apparent. Secondly, whoever it was that had been inside this noiseless box, they had wanted out. The bloody stretch of nail marks and bites showed that they had clawed and fought in an attempt to escape. Finally, it was clear from the state of the emaciated corpse we found rotted inside that this person had starved to death over the course of several weeks after having been sealed up inside. It took me less than a day to piece together the scenario. The man's name was Jake Weber. He had booked this apartment as an Airbnb 3 months ago. Arriving at night, he had let himself in only for the door to be shut and sealed from outside behind him. A subterfuge door was placed over the original, and the soundproofing prevented anyone from hearing Jake's desperate screams. Airbnb had been a trap. Whoever owned it had allowed Jake to enter, then sealed him up inside to die a slow, painful death. Of course, the first thing I did was check who owned the Airbnb. Sure enough, according to Airbnb's records, Jake was the last person to rent the place. There is no availability after that. What worries me most, however, was that when I checked the records yesterday, the owner of this apartment did not have just one place. He had 54 properties in different locations across the country. In every case, there are bookings up to a certain date over the last year, then they all just stop. And of course, that is just on Airbnb and just on that one account. How many accounts does this guy have? How many apartments does he rent, and how many of them are actually traps? Ways of luring people inside so we can seal them up and starve them to death? I wonder, as we begin to go through them one by one, how many will be empty, and how many of that 54 are now makeshift tombs? It's funny how one thing can make such a huge difference. In most circumstances, the gentle touch of another person in bed, the subtle warmth of another's body, can be comforting. Sometimes there is nothing better in the world than laying on your side under the blankets, half dozing and content within the safety of another's embrace as they wrap their arms around you. These are good things and positive feelings. Unless, of course, you went to bed alone. When you are alone in a rented Airbnb apartment, with doors locked and windows fastened. When you are traveling alone, are not expecting visitors, and do not have a partner to curl in bed besides, then things are different. Then, the presence at 3:30 a.m. of a hand sliding gently onto your hip, the warm, damp hiss of another's breath against your neck in the darkness, and the crackling brush as the hair of legs brushes against yours beneath the sheets, is terrifying. It's also exactly what happened to me. Having checked into the Airbnb quite late, I had literally come inside, thrown my bag into the opposite corner, and begun to get undressed for bed. I quickly showered, removed my makeup, and slid between the sheets, all within a half hour of having opened the front door to the place. In the hours before, I had been corresponding with the owner via WhatsApp, checking the details and struggling, not a little, to find the place amongst the winding back streets. The conversation itself had been difficult, because whilst I'd wanted just the basic information, where are the keys? What's the alarm code? How do I access the Wi-Fi? He seemed to want to converse as if we were friends, casually chatting. He asked about my name, how long I had worn my hair short, and complimented both my dress and the earrings I was wearing in my Airbnb profile photo. Whilst I was sure he was just trying to be friendly, I found the whole process frustrating and wished he'd just get to the point. I have enough friends. I don't need some random Airbnb owner as a pal. I just want him to be a decent host. I thought the conversation crossed the line from friendly to mildly inappropriate when I received his final text of the evening. It read, "I hope you are inside, comfortable and all tucked up in bed." Whilst it could be read entirely innocently, I didn't really like the idea of him imagining me in bed, and found it a little intrusive. Still, I was exhausted, and despite being a little strange, I had to say that the host, whose name was Renzo, had kept the place immaculately clean and tidy. The bed was large and comfortable, and within a few minutes, I could already feel myself beginning to drift off. By the time I woke again at around 3:30 a.m., the hand could have been there for a while. It was not the first touch that woke me, but rather the weight and warmth of the unfamiliar contact. I remember shrugging slightly as I came around, trying to displace this new additional weight like it was a misplaced blanket. It was only as I woke with a little more clarity that I became fully aware of my situation. The new weight, the additional sensation, was the touch of a hand, fingers resting softly on the swell of my hip and gently kneading the flesh there. I opened my eyes onto the pitch black, resisting the urge to scream, to leap from the bed and thrash wildly at whoever had slipped into bed with me. If I allowed my eyes to adjust, I thought, then I would be able to see who was behind, which uninvited interloper had sidled into the bed and was now spooning me and formed some kind of plan. As I lay there, the man's breath, because it was unquestionably a man's breath, raising the hairs on my neck, I shifted slightly in an effort to see the face. I could reason only that this was Renzo, the Airbnb landlord who had let himself in without me hearing. Finally, I decided to act. With a single jolting thrust, I threw my head backwards, hoping that the force would connect with the face of whomever was behind with a solid fracturing crack, exploding the nose and granting me some window of opportunity to jump out of bed and flee. So I threw it backwards. Instead of hitting my head on a nose, cheeks, or teeth, however, instead of smashing with some great force through the flesh of the face, my head instead hit something soft and just continued going. The only way I can properly describe it is like the effect of pressing too hard onto the skin of a piece of fruit that is far too overripe. The force of the blow from my head did not shatter anything, but instead imploded it, as a too heavy thumb might the skin of an overripe plum. Leaping out of bed, I spun around and looked back toward where I had been lying, expecting to find the creepy pervert of an owner laying there bloodied and ready to fight me for escape. Instead, what I saw was something that was only like a man. The figure was pale, the skin of a mottled, almost reptilian grey, covered with hair like a man on the legs, chest and arms. Where the face may once have been, however, there was now only an imploded mess, a concave bowl-like shape that looked to me like a burst and deflated basketball. Above this dent that my head had clearly created, there was a straggling mass of greyish-white hair. The thing squirmed and writhed evidently in pain and grasped outward towards me, but all it touched was air. I had already bolted. In the years since then, people have tried to tell me that what happened to me was a dream, that the thing with the sunken face was in my head, that I simply imagined the touch, weight and texture of another person in the bed, that I sunk my head back into the pillow, and that what I saw was a figment of my imagination. To those people I say, maybe. But imagination doesn't usually take almost a week to properly wash out of your hair. But the liquid and mulch, the putrid mess of rotted meat and thick black oil, left from the impact, took a week to wash out of mine. That was no dream.